Thank you. Good morning. My name is Carl Jonitz, and I serve on the Board of Trustees here at First Unitarian. Whoever you are, whomever you love, whether you carry joy or sorrow in your heart, you are welcome here. All people of goodwill are warmly invited to join us on the great journey of the mind, the heart, and the spirit. If this is your first time with us today, please let the offering basket pass you by. Good. If this is your... Better? You can see this is not my day job. We don't do CNN. We don't do anything. Okay, back to the beginning. If this is your first time with us today, please let the offering basket pass you by when it comes around. Your presence here is gift enough. We hope you will join us for coffee and conversation in the community room after the service. We would love to get to know you better and answer any questions you might have. During the coffee hour, please introduce yourself to someone with a yellow mug so that we may more easily get to know you. You can learn more about us on the congregation's, even I noticed that. You can learn more about us on the congregation's website, where you can also find our weekly email blast and information about activities and groups within the church. On the first and third Sunday of the month, the offering at First Unitarian is donated to an organization from the Denver community, which has been chosen by the Faith in Action Council. All cash and checks will be donated in full unless otherwise marked. We will learn about the organization chosen to share our financial resources later today in the service. For the next hour, please silence your cell phones and other electronic devices, and welcome to worship.
Good morning, First Unitarian. I want to acknowledge that today was kind of a hard day to wake up if you've been paying attention to the news. I'll have a little bit more to say about that later. If you didn't happen to catch it, there was a mass shooting last night in Colorado Springs. At least 5 people were killed at a gay nightclub, and 18 people wounded. We have a great deal to do this morning, so I'm going to get right to it. It is, if you're not aware, it is Native American Heritage Month, and partially for that reason, we're going to begin this morning with an acknowledgement. First Unitarian Denver acknowledges that the land we occupy is the traditional territory and ancestral homeland of indigenous people reaching back thousands of years. We specifically acknowledge the Arapaho and Cheyenne people who were forcibly removed for the westward expansion of the United States. We acknowledge the scores of other native nations who traditionally moved through this land for trade, for hunting, for gathering, for healing, including the Lakota, the Ute, the Kiowa, the Comanche, Apache, and Shoshone peoples. We pay our respect and acknowledge all the tribal nations and ancestors of this place, and we affirm and pay respect to the many contemporary indigenous nations who are still connected to the land on which we gather. Our call to worship today is a prayer that was translated by Chief Yellowlark of the Lakota Sioux in 1887. O Great Spirit, whose voice I hear in the winds, whose breath gives life to all the world, hear me, I need your strength and wisdom. Let me walk in beauty, and make my eyes ever hold the red and purple sunset. Make my hands respect the things you have made, and my ears sharp to hear your voice. Make me wise, so that I may understand the things you have taught my people. Let me learn the lessons you have hidden in every leaf and rock. Help me remain calm and strong in the face of all that comes toward me. Help me find compassion without empathy overwhelming me. I seek strength, not to be greater than my brother, but to fight my greatest enemy, myself. Make me always ready to come to you with clean hands and straight eyes, so when life fades as the fading sunset, my spirit may come to you without shame. Welcome to our worship this morning.
Welcome. Please take a moment to greet the people around you in front, behind, and to your sides. And now, if you would now join me in singing our welcome song, whoever you are, wherever you are welcome here. Join me in singing. We are many, we are one, the light of the world is within you. Sacred and worthy is your soul. A place has been made for you. Welcome.
No. Yes. Okay. Good morning. Great. I'm Erin Kenworthy, and I'm your Director of Religious Exploration. This is the Time for All Ages. So if you're young or young at heart, you want to come up, come on up. So I have changed my topic for this morning, what to talk about 4 times. It's hard to choose for me what to talk about. We could talk about how our Unitarian Universalist faith has changed since it first started to today, right? Or we could talk about how it will continue to change. Or we could take a moment to talk about the story of Thanksgiving and how that old story requires some change in order to tell the truth of what happened when white settlers arrived and set up communities where native nations already existed. We could talk about the Transgender Day of Remembrance, a day where we hold in our hearts the human beings who have changed themselves in order to live as their full selves and have faced hatred and harm and death in response from a culture that continues to fear sexuality, gender identity, and expression, and other differences and diversity that our faith community celebrates. We could talk about the changes our hearts and bodies do, or maybe don't, experience when we hear about violence in our world far away and very close to our home. There's a lot to talk about. And usually my time for all ages only lasts 5-7 minutes. It's hard to squeeze a lot in to that time, but it's good to know that we have lots of time after Time for All Ages and after church is over in the rest of our week to talk through things that we need to talk about. So change presents a lot of options, and it can be hard to figure out what to do first when something changes. So I'm going to invite everybody in here to remember that in those moments, it's important to breathe. We're going to practice breathing, and I want you to know, I was in the sanctuary this week wandering around, and I found in the back of the room this long silver pole. Does anybody see it? You want to turn around and look? You can stand up here if you can't see it. Do you see it back there? It's a chime. And we can hit that and it will make a noise. And we can actually, if you pay really good attention to your body, you can feel that noise in your body. And so we're going to hit the chime and we're going to breathe. If you want to, you can close your eyes. And then if you want to turn it into a little bit of like a meditation game, you can open your eyes when you don't hear the chime anymore. Sound good? And you just keep breathing all the way through. Are we ready to try this out as a whole community? We're going to breathe together. Are we ready? Lena, will you hit the bell? That was so nice. Can you still hear it? Am I talking over it? Human beings have a long history of harming each other and of fearing difference, of seeing groups of other humans as less than human and then attacking them. But human beings also have a long history of noticing the awe and wonder of being a human, of caring for and including fellow humans, and for widening the circle so that all humans can feel seen and experience connection and know that they belong here. The world is wide enough for us to exist alongside humans who look and think and live differently than ourselves. In order to widen the circle, it means that the truth, the whole story of the past, must be told and believed and retold in new ways. The stories that we tell ourselves, about our holidays and our identities and who we love and who we are, need to include some breathing room, space for the possibility of change to show up. Here, and across UU congregations across the continent, we are covenanted communities. We have a covenant in our classrooms and in our whole church. And these are agreements about how we will be together in joy and in hard times when there is work to do or change to navigate. We stay together and we hold our covenants together. So we're going to say our church covenant together. I'll say a line and then you can repeat it back to me. Sound good? Yeah? I will listen to you. I will make space for you. I will include you. Together, we will be a community of love, respect, and justice. Together, we will learn about white supremacy culture. To create an equitable congregation. Together, we will protect the vulnerable. When we fall out of covenant, because it will happen, we will call each other back in. I am here for that kind of community, and I hope that you are too, not just today, but for many days into the future, when it is hard and when it is joyful and when we need to navigate change or hold space for things that are hard and tell the truth. That's what we can do here together. Thank you, and please join me in singing our children out to programming this morning.
Would you please rise in body and or spirit and join me in singing out of our gray hymnal, number 162, Gonna Lay Down My Sword and Shield. The words will also be on the monitors behind me. Gonna lay down my sword and shield down by the riverside, down by the riverside, down by the riverside. Gonna lay down my sword and shield down by the riverside. Gonna study war no more. I ain't gonna study war no more. I ain't gonna study war no more. Ain't gonna study war no more. I ain't gonna study war no more. Ain't gonna study war no more. Ain't gonna study war no more. Gonna lay down my burden down by the riverside, down by the riverside, down by the riverside. Gonna lay down my burden down by the riverside and study war no more. I ain't gonna study war no more. Ain't gonna study war no more. Ain't gonna study war no more. I ain't gonna study war no more. Ain't gonna study war no more. Ain't gonna study war no more. Gonna shake hands around the world, and down the roam. Everywhere I roam, everywhere I roam. Gonna shake hands around the world, everywhere I roam. gonna study war no more. I ain't gonna study war no more. Ain't gonna study war no more. Ain't gonna study war no more. I ain't gonna study war no more. Ain't gonna study war no more. Ain't gonna study war.
Hello there. My name is Colleen Bryan. Today, my colleagues on the Giving and Action team invite the Native American Housing Circle to receive our third Sunday offering. So unless you indicate differently, any money given today will go directly to the Native American Housing Circle. Many of us know that homelessness in Denver has seen a sustained increase. Since 2018, we've reached a 14-year high in the city. Fewer of us may realize that Native peoples are among the unhoused neighbors at more than 6 times their share of the total population. So in about 2019, it became clear to a number of the Native leaders across the metro area that lack of access to affordable, stable, safe housing was the major barrier to other things they were trying to do within the Native community, things that had to do with health inequities and education and family preservation, economic justice. So today we are honored to welcome Lucille Echohawk, who was one of those leaders and who is a founding board chair of the Native American Housing Circle. She will receive on the Circle's behalf your donation toward the Circle's work to address the issue of Native homelessness. You may either put your check or cash into the offering basket that comes through, or people like our friend Ruth Steiner, who are viewing from home, can donate online, either at the First Unitarian website or on the Go to the Giving tab, and just click down until you get to the Giving and Action line, and that's how you'll donate online. Please be as generous as you can. This is critical work. Thank you. Lucille?
Good morning, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be with you on this lovely day in Colorado during Native American Heritage Month. It's almost toward the end, but it's been a good month. There's been much attention paid to Native people, and that was a beautiful land acknowledgement this morning that was read. And I would just add to that my nation, the Pawnee Nation of Oklahoma, now of Oklahoma, ancestrally we were in Nebraska. We are one of those 48 historical tribes of Colorado. We lived here for a long time, and very sacred to us is what is now known as Pikes Peak. In our tribal language, which sadly I do not speak, it translates to where the earth meets the sky, which I think is so fitting for our beautiful state and those of us who reside here now. And I think in a lot of comfort with one another. There is been in my 41 years here as a Coloradoan, a lot of attention paid to people becoming a lot more knowledgeable about the Native history of Colorado, and those of us who are contemporary members of the societies of Colorado. I appreciate Colleen's wonderful introduction. I was one of the leaders who stepped forward, but she did not mention her daughter, Rachel Bryan Ocker, who is actually the impetus that brought forward the Native American Housing Circle as it formed. Rachel came to me one day at the Denver Indian Family Resource Center, sat down and said, "Do you realize that every family we see here has housing issues? And don't you think the community ought to be doing something about those?" And I certainly could not argue with her. And so we started convening like-minded individuals, not just Native people, but partners, collaborators in the broader community of Denver to come together in periodic meetings that over time became the coalition, the Native American Housing Circle. And then this past April, we brought the group together to talk about the work we'd been trying to do as a loose coalition. Should we be a nonprofit organization? And the resounding response was yes. And so in record time, and I've been the wonderful co-developers of 3 or 4 nonprofits here, I was absolutely amazed how quickly the Internal Revenue Service accepted our application. So since September, 2 weeks, ordinarily it takes a year, we were designated as a 501c3, which was very exciting, unexpected, and so now the challenge is really on to step up to our vision, our mission, and most of all, to give real service to those in need, particularly the homeless, through a wonderful partner organization called Colorado Village Collaborative. We have a Native-specific safe outdoor space, which sadly burned to the ground about a month ago, but it will be rebuilt, and many more services need to come forward, and it is the responsibility of the Native American Housing Circle as a nonprofit to gather the resources and work in even closer partnership with our many collaborators to effectively address that need. And I think it's especially mindful to many of us now that the weather is much colder, that we need to provide warmth and safe spaces for those who find themselves homeless. So I thank you for listening. I will stay for coffee afterwards and look forward to meeting those who would like to talk more. I did bring a few handouts if anyone would like more information. Since we're a brand new nonprofit, we don't yet have a website, but it's under construction, and we look forward to doing our part in the nonprofit community of Colorado. So thank you very much for your time.
Your gifts this morning, freely given, are gratefully received. Thank you for your contributions, your generosity, your support of the Native American Housing Circle. Thank you. Thank you for your contributions. We, as you know, every other week or so, yes? It's not really a Q&A, but what's up? Thank you. Thank you. Okay. So as you know, we do Giving in Action Sundays every other week. We give our offering to a local agency who does great work in the community, and the Native American Housing Fund is one of those which we have proudly chosen to support. We also do occasionally longer-term efforts, and you are undoubtedly aware, if you've been around for any length of time, that we have a reparations project going on, and we've been building towards that for really about, well, I mean, realistically, probably about 70 years. But more specifically, for about 2 years, we had an ongoing group that has been doing work on reparations and making community liaisons and hoping to educate us all on exactly what that means and why and how that works. And to tell us a little bit more about that, I am pleased to introduce the co-chairs of that effort, Patrick Horton and Steve Brainerd.
Good morning, everyone. First Unitarian of Denver harbors a long history of racial justice work, dating all the way back to the Civil Rights era and before that. This is a history that we have researched and will be glad to provide for you upon request, should you want to see that. Our latest venture into this work, the Racial Justice Project, was organized in 2016. Since its inception, the project has offered lectures, workshops, book readings, Sunday potluck speakers, and other educational opportunities regarding discrimination and repression in the Black community. In 2020, upon the murder of George Floyd and the rise of Black Lives Matter, the Racial Justice Project began work on a Black reparations fund for First Unitarian, involving much research and discussion with both the Black community and our own project members. With the support of the board, the Racial Justice Project formed a steering committee composed of representatives from FIAC, the Stewardship and Finance Committees, the board, Reverend Mike, and the two of us, where we began ironing out logistics and details for this project. While we've had a good number of anti-racism projects, we will continue to offer opportunities for education. They haven't all lent themselves to congregation-wide participation, and that is why economic reparations is such a good opportunity. We can reach everyone. Finally, let us keep in mind one of our principal motivators for this effort, and that is our own congregational covenant, which in part states, "Together we will learn about white supremacy culture to create an equitable congregation."
The few economic reparations for African Americans undertaken by predominantly white faith communities have almost all been funded from accumulated institutional wealth of churches and dioceses. And that's fine. Some of these efforts have resulted in some very big sums. But in this mode, nothing is required of congregations. There is no atonement from persons who are the current beneficiaries and overseers of systemic racism. A Black reparations fund at First Unitarian, of course, should be different because we do different. That's kind of our gig. The Racial Justice Project's proposal is that we, members, individually, personally, determine how we should account to ourselves and to one another for our part in white supremacy culture, and not rely on those who came before us to pay our accounts. All funds we raise by January 15th will be delivered to the Denver Black Reparations Council, a Black-run group created to manage reparative grants on behalf of the Denver Foundation. Many of you have now met Harold Fields and Arthur McFarland, two of the impressive and dedicated Denver Black leaders who comprise the council. The Denver Black Reparations Council has been preparing for 2 years to help assure white donors that their contributions to economic repair are responsibly deployed in the Black community by the Black community. Within a year, we will know exactly how First Unitarian's fund has been applied, and then we hope be able to follow our dollars with more relational kinds of support. This is something that First Unitarian is uniquely situated and uniquely prepared to do. It's our time.
The Racial Justice Project fully acknowledges that many groups deserve our attention, and this certainly includes our Indigenous brothers and sisters. But we are asking you to travel the road to Black reparations with us. No, money is not the only answer. It's simply one answer. This should not be compared to, nor is it designed to, compete with or become a substitute for our annual stewardship campaign in the spring. What we hope to accomplish in our reparations work is to build better relationships with the Black community. And this is but one way to do that, but it is an important way. In a capitalist culture, money talks. We all have to do our own thinking here. For those of you who remember the Capital Campaign, consider what you donated at that time several years ago. Perhaps consider redirecting the annual amount that you give to groups that are more a reflection of your privilege than your deep values. A small group of persons involved in the planning for this fund have already committed $86,000. Maybe that gives you a sense of the importance of this effort to some people. We ask you to join us in our continued anti-racism work involving reparations, social outreach, activism, and advocacy efforts, not with pridefulness, but with humility, in the hopes that we may become a model for other faith communities to follow.
This week, if you are a pledging member of this congregation, you will receive via U.S. mail an envelope from First Unitarian. Please do not throw this away. In the envelope, you'll find information on the fund donation process and a brief description of how the fund will operate. We're trying to accomplish a lot very quickly. If you wish to donate to the fund, we ask that you make a written commitment to reparations, stating the amount that you intend to contribute. We have to receive all commitments by December 31st. This will allow the congregation, us to inform the congregation of how the fundraising is progressing over the next 6 weeks, and it will also help us ensure that your contribution finds its way to the reparations fund. After you've made your commitment prior to January 15th, we want to receive all donations. The materials that you have not thrown away will guide you in the ways that you can fulfill your obligation, your commitment. The church's online giving platform, Breeze, is also available to facilitate both commitments and donations. If you have any questions at all, please find someone from the Racial Justice Project in the community room or contact one of us via email. We will get you an answer. We know the holidays are approaching. The market is still down a bit. And this project might be more refined if we tackled it next fall. But let's try to embrace the wisdom of W.E.B. Du Bois. Now is the accepted time. Not tomorrow, not some more convenient season. It is today that our best work can be done, and not some future day or future year. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
I'll just take a moment to welcome Rebecca Mullaney to our sanctuary this morning. So I'm aware of the time. Things have run a little long. We've been sitting a while. If you'd like to, stand up and stretch. It's always good for me. Please feel free to do that. Actually, feel free to do that at any time, but I did mention earlier that we had a lot to do this morning. I want to let you know about a couple of things happening in our larger community before I begin a sermon. I want to let you know that Liz Case celebrated her 95th birthday a couple days ago. I'm reasonably certain she is watching. Oh, she's here. Hi, Liz. I was going to say, I was certain you were watching online, but you're even better. You're right here. I want to let you know that Samuel Stone, who is Brian Stone, wherever he went, Brian Stone's son had his 1-year-old birthday last Monday and then spent the good part of the week in the hospital, including the ICU for RSV. Yeah, very, very scary stuff. But he is home, and I understand is crawling around as if nothing happened at the moment, with the exception of a few coughing spells. I want to let you know I spent a little bit of time with Steve Kaminer earlier this week. As I mentioned last week, Steve is home on hospice care. He is not taking in any nutrition at this moment, only water. Steve will not be with us too much longer, but please keep Steve and Joyce in your thoughts and prayers. Michael Carr spent last week in hospital. Michael's here back there. For observation and tests, the good news is that he's home and well. The bad news is they didn't find exactly what they were looking for, so they still don't. Michael still doesn't know exactly what's going on. I want to let you know Nancy Crow. I heard from Mark Skrotsky this morning. Nancy is making very slow but steady progress each week, working hard on her getting movement back in her strength and movement back in her lower legs. There's progress, but this is going to be a very long haul, probably a year or even more. I want to hold up at least one of our members who is really struggling financially right now and not able to pay their rent. First Unitarian is going to help out with that. And if you are someone who is struggling to pay the rent or keep food on the table, please let me know. I have a fund for exactly that purpose. I am happy to provide confidential financial assistance. Lastly, we mourn this morning, and we rage this morning, and we pray for the victims of the shooting last night at the Q Club in Colorado Springs. There are too many guns, and too much hate, and too many guns, and too much ignorance, and too many guns, and too many victims, and too many guns. As of this morning, 5 people have had their lives ended, 18 are wounded, the shooter is in custody, but there are too many guns. Not enough regulation, and way, way, way too many victims. So what I had in mind this morning, by way of a sermon, I'm going to do something I've approached but never actually done. I'm going to try and do a sermon without any notes whatsoever. I've threatened to do it before, but I've never actually followed through. And this is partially, what I have to say this morning is partially by request. I've had some requests that we have so many new people and not many of them kind of know where we come from, Unitarian Universalists, that is. And so I thought I'd fill in a little of that history, but I don't want to, like, the last thing I want to do is give you like a history lecture. So what I have in mind is sort of a story of big picture, sort of where we come from and how we got here, and I'm not really interested in names and dates and places and particular events, but I'm really interested in ideas, and I'm really interested in the flow of history, and I'm interested in how ideas come up in history, and I'm really, if there's sort of one thing I want to convey to you this morning, as I talk about history and I talk about our story, one thing I want to really convey, and I hope you already understand this, is that nothing in history happens in a vacuum or by itself. Right? Everything is connected to everything else. And so one of the ways that I like to start this story about where Unitarian Universalism comes from is 2,500 years ago. So roughly about 500 BCE, and roughly about 100 years on either side of that. That 200-year period from roughly 600 to roughly 400 BCE, this is an amazing period in human history. I don't know if you're aware of that. But if you just think about the religious reform that was happening in that period of time. In that period of time, the Buddha was alive in India. And the Buddha was a reformer. The Buddha felt like the Hindu rituals and God and the pantheon of Hindu gods had just grown stale and was not really serving people. And Buddha, clearly one of the most influential human beings who've ever lived. Mahavira was also alive, who founded Jainism, was also alive in India, was a contemporary of Buddha. Zoroaster was alive in Iran, and Zoroastrianism, you may or may not know, was profoundly influential to early Judaic thinking, especially around the concepts of good and evil and the end times. In China, Confucius was alive, and Confucius was a reformer, believing that we needed to put in lots of strict social rules and honor the ancestors properly, and he felt like what was happening in China at that time was not serving people, and people had gotten away from the basics. And Lao Tzu, who wrote the Tao Te Ching, the founder of Taoism, was alive. There's a legend that Confucius and Lao Tzu actually met at one point. There's no actual evidence of that. In fact, there's no real evidence that Lao Tzu ever even lived. But somebody wrote the Tao Te Ching, and it's one of the three syncretic religions in China. China, by the way, I think it's fascinating. China does not have the issue that Westerners have with religion, where you can either be a Christian or a pagan or something else. In China, you can be a Buddhist and a Taoist and a Confucianist all at the same time, and it's all perfectly fine. Much wisdom there. This is also the period of time with the classic ancient Greeks, right? Plato and Aristotle and Socrates are alive and writing and laying their humanistic foundations that were so profoundly influential for the development of Western civilization and concepts of humanism and such. And in this period of time, actually I do have a couple of notes. Just a couple. And in this period of time, 572 BCE to be specific, this is the last vestige of the ancient nation of Israel, which had split off to become the ancient nation of Judah, which was sacked in 572 BCE by the invading Assyrians. And at that point in time, they didn't really call it Judaism, it was a Hebrew nation. And Judah was a theocracy. And the temple in Jerusalem was the center of the Hebrew cult. And again, it was a theocracy, right? When you got married, you went to the temple. When somebody died, you went to the temple. You paid your taxes to the temple. But in 572, the temple was sacked. And the Assyrians did what Some invaders do. Not all. Many invaders, when they conquer a place, they kind of assimilate the folks who are there, but that's not what happened in 572. They scattered the Hebrew people. And that was the origin of the rabbinic tradition, which I think is just fascinating, right? They literally could not be a temple-centered cult or religion anymore. They had to become what they became known of throughout the Middle East and are still known this way to Muslims as the people of the book. Jews are known as the people of the book because they wrote their stories down. And those stories, and this happened right in the years after 572 BCE, those stories became the first 5 books of the Old Testament, sometimes referred to as the Pentateuch. That rabbinic tradition, anyway, this period of time, that's amazing. All this reform was happening in Europe, in North Africa, in China, in India. All this is happening all at the same time. One of the things that some historians argue is that that's not entirely a coincidence. Not entirely, and I'm not making a case for divine intervention here, but I do think there's something to the way that the human needs change over time, and human needs are always reflective of the cultures and the societies in which human beings live. And the reality is that, 2,500 years ago, even going back to about 10,000 years ago, but in that period, there were profound changes happening in the way human beings related to each other. There was the origin of nation states and complex societies and international trade. We know for certain, there were Buddhist missionaries in Alexandria and Egypt about 300 BC. I think that's kind of amazing, right? So we have to keep in mind this is a actually pretty multicultural world. That certainly is now, but it was even back then. And some historians say, that with the advent of nation states and the complexity of societies and international economies and massive human specialization, that the old mythologies that had existed for maybe tens of thousands of years just weren't making it anymore. And so, for whatever reason, in this 200-year period, the time was ripe for reform. And all this reform started to happen about then. Of course, there were previous and subsequent reforms, but I just think that period of time is fascinating. I call attention to the Hebrew tradition and the rabbinic tradition because that's the tradition Jesus was born into. Right, 500 years later or so, roughly. And so that's the next chapter in the story. In the story I'm going to tell you this morning, right? So Jesus lives his brief, tragic life and has a number of followers and dies his tragic death. And right from the beginning, this is not probably the way they would tell you this story in a Catholic church, but it's the way I'm going to tell you this story. The reality is, right from the beginning, or I should say the end of Jesus' life, the apostles, his followers, did not 100% agree on what had just happened and who Jesus was and what his life and his death actually meant. And so the apostles they spread out across the Middle East and they founded churches. They founded churches in Alexandria and Jerusalem and Antioch and Chalcedon, even all the way to Rome, but they weren't all teaching exactly the same thing. Close, but not exactly the same thing. There were subtle theological and practical differences, and that went on for about 325 years, where all these Christian churches were growing and existing in all these different places around the Middle East, and that went on till roughly in the 325 or so. And what happened was Constantine, who was the emperor of Rome, converted to Christianity. And we'll never know exactly if this was a expression of faith or political expediency, but it was not okay with Constantine that they were teaching different Christianity in Alexandria than they were teaching in Jerusalem, than they were teaching in Antioch, than they were teaching in Rome, because he owned it all, essentially. So he calls, in 325, he calls the Council of Nicaea. And right when you get an invitation, I brought together all the Christian leaders from all these different places and brought them together for a council in Nicaea and said, we're gonna iron this out. We're gonna come down on one answer and we're all gonna teach the same thing. And if you're not on board, you're out of here. Like when you get an invitation from the emperor, it's not an optional kind of a thing. You don't just RSVP and say, I can't make it. So any of my ex-Catholics here can still recite the Nicene Creed? At least one? Two? Probably more. Any ex-Catholics who still recites parts of the Nicene Creed? Yeah. So the Nicene Creed, of course, was astonishingly influential, right? All across Europe, built into, astonishingly influential. I'm not going to go into the Eastern Orthodox Church. I'm really just going to focus on sort of where the Unitarian Universalist threads come out of this larger story. But that's a whole other fascinating bit of history. So 325, the Council of Nicaea, and what we should really grasp here is that the Council of Nicaea was just like the first great Catholic council. In fact, there have been 22 of them since 325 AD. There was Council of Nicaea, the Council of Chalcedon, the Council of Constantinople, the Council of Lathrum, Council of Lyon, on and on. They did this where periodically there would be schisms in the church or things going on in the church, and they'd have to get together and say, okay, what's our position here? The Council of Nicaea was what's our position on the Trinity, and that's where the Trinity really became Christian dogma. Father, Son, Holy Spirit, and so on. I tell that story because I just want to be clear. There's, these the Christian doctrines and dogmas that we think of, that didn't happen just like all at once. Okay? This was a long, long process of people trying to solve social, religious, and historical problems, is how we kind of ended up with the Christianity we know and love today, or maybe not love. So from 325 to the 1500s, in Europe, there's really only one Christian church. It's not like today where we have, a whole smorgasbord of Presbyterians and Lutherans and Baptists and Unitarians and so on and so forth, right? From that whole period, there's the Holy Roman Catholic Church. That's it. That's the only one there is. 1517, Europe's kind of a mess. In many ways. Well, Europe has been a mess for a very, very long time and was even worse of a mess in the 1100s with the plague and such. But in the late 1500s, Europe's kind of a mess. And one of the things that has caused it to be a mess is there's this dramatic rise of the merchant class. There are vast amounts of money being made in the urban centers in Italy and Switzerland and England and Spain and Germany. And this rising urban class had a lot of power, and they weren't particularly interested in paying their taxes to the Catholic Church. So there was a lot of undermining of what was happening with religion in those days. The other thing that has to be included in any reasonable understanding or history of this period is the invention of the printing press in the mid-1400s. Prior to the invention of the printing press, literacy rates in Europe were probably about 1% or even 0.5%. We don't really know, but hardly anybody could read or write. Interestingly, I think this is interesting, there's no evidence whatsoever that Jesus could read or write. He was almost certainly illiterate. That's an aside, that's another story. I'll probably do a sermon on that someday. But literacy rates start to rise after the mid-1400s or so. And one of the first books they printed was the Bible. And so people are actually able to read the Bible for the first time, like the first time ever. Because prior to that time, you got everything you knew about what was in the Bible from the Catholic priests who read it in Latin and then told you what was in it. And that's how you knew what was in the Bible. You had no other access. But after the printing press, the Bible's being distributed, and this actually caused the Catholic Church, a whole boatload of problems, because people could read the thing for the first time. Martin Luther read the thing and saw nothing in the Bible to justify the Catholic Church as he knew it, which was at that time, and even Catholic historians will agree with this, hopelessly, ridiculously, obscenely corrupt. Obscenely. Like, those were days you could buy your way out of hell. Like, literally, they called them indulgences. And if you had sinned or something like that, you went to your priest, and the priest told you how much you could pay to get yourself out of purgatory and back in good graces with God. That's just one example, but there are many, many, many more. 1517, Martin Luther nails a list of 95 complaints to the door of a church in Wittenberg, and they are basically complaints against the Catholic Church and how the Catholic Church operates, and somewhat against Catholic theology at that time, but mostly against the Catholic Church itself and its structures, its taxes, its authority, its opulence, its decadence. 1517, and Europe, already very fragile for lots of complicated reasons, kind of implodes. And there are internecine wars, and the next 150 years in Germany, in Spain, in Austria, in all over the place, there's these horrible wars. Catholics killing Protestants, Protestants killing Catholics, Protestant groups springing up all over the place, followers of Martin Luther, followers of John Calvin, Anabaptists, just dozens and dozens of Protestant groups, even Episcopalians, or the groups who later became Episcopalians in England. One of those groups were Unitarians. They got their name because they read the Bible, and in their reading of the Bible, they didn't find the Trinity. It wasn't there. Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, what they'd been taught from the Catholic Church forever and ever, they couldn't find it. They didn't think it was biblically justified. Their reading of the Bible was that God was, whatever God was, the divine, the creator, it was best represented by a unity rather than a Trinity. That's how they got their name Unitarian. They were known affectionately, well, not affectionately, actually. They were known, that was known as the Unitarian heresy. Heresy, by the word, is a lovely old Latin word. It means to choose. A heretic is one who chooses. The Unitarian heresy was not particularly popular, but they were an awful thorn in the side of both Protestants and Catholics, because theology was really important to them, and they would get into these god-awful theological debates with John Calvin and others about the nature of God and the nature of Jesus, and whether Jesus was, two persons in one being, or one being in two persons, and all that sort of theological minutia that, frankly, in grad school just bored me to tears, because I don't care. All right, I need to just kind of move this forward and wrap it up. I want to talk briefly about the early 1800s. Unitarianism has gravitated to North America. The colonies have become the early United States of America, and there are many Unitarian congregations throughout the eastern seaboard, all the way down into Georgia and Florida, all the way up into Maine, but there is no denomination. And in 1819, William Ellery Channing gave a sermon called Unitarian Christianity. And again, this is like nothing in history happens in a vacuum. This is the tail end of the Enlightenment period, and I invite you to just think about sort of the Enlightenment period, roughly between like 1600 and 1800. Right, 1600, or maybe 1500. But anyway, 1600, let's say 1600. There's probably 300 or 400 people in the world that could give you a reasonable definition of democracy in 1600. Right? These scholars who've studied the ancient Greeks in their universities in Rome and Florence and Zurich and Munich and places like that. By 1800, democracy is the talk of the world, right? This weird experiment that they're doing in North America. Massive social education. In 1600, most people still believed that the sun revolved around the earth, and the earth was the center of the universe, and people were the made in the image of God. We were the epitome of creation around which everything revolved. By 1800, we know this is not true. Most people understand, right? We orbit the sun. The sun is one of many, 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 many stars in a galaxy full of stars. This was not very friendly to classic Catholic or Protestant theology. Right, to understand ourselves in the cosmos this way. So anyway, that's just a couple of examples of this incredible explosion of knowledge and scientific understanding that happens in this period between 1600 and 1800. So and the end of the 1800s, so this is sometimes known as the Age of Reason, which I think is really a horrible misnomer, but that's how some historians call it. Thomas Paine's book of that name is widely distributed, and in this period of time, Channing gives this sermon called Unitarian Christianity, in which he just uses reason on the classical doctrines of Christianity, the virgin birth and the bodily resurrection and the efficacy of baptism and all that sort of Christian dogma. And he basically comes to the conclusion that you can't get there by reason. None of this stuff makes any sense whatsoever. And the subtext of that, which he's actually quite clear about, if there's a God and God created us, God gave us minds, shouldn't we use them? And shouldn't we use them on our religion? And if we use them on our religion, here's the conclusion we come to. 1838, Ralph Waldo Emerson gives a sermon at the graduating school of the graduation of the Harvard Divinity School, in which he observes, isn't the sun shining today? And isn't that the same sun that shone on Jesus' head 2,000 years ago? And isn't that the same sun that beat on the backs of the people who built the Great Wall and people who built the pyramids? And isn't the moon that comes out tonight, isn't that the same moon that Jesus looked up and saw? Isn't creation, isn't the world and the cosmos, isn't it all of it just ongoing? Isn't it just rolling along like it's always done? So if that's true, why should we assume that revelation happened with Jesus 2,000 years ago and then it's just done? It's over. Why can't you and I, just like Jesus did, why can't you and I have an original relationship to God, to the Creator? Why do we have to go through Jesus? And by extension, why do you have to go through the church? And why do you even have to go through the guy up in the pulpit, right? You want an experience of creation? Take a deep breath. You're it. I'm oversimplifying, of course, but that's the idea. A couple of years later, Theodore Parker, and I'm going to wrap up with this, I promise. Although I do love telling this story. Theodore Parker, 1841, gives a sermon called The Transient and the Permanent in Christianity. And he notes, he just observes that all of these things we think of as the doctrines or the core ideas of Christianity, like the virgin birth and the bodily resurrection, the empty tomb, all that stuff. He shows in great detail how the teachings about those things have changed over the centuries. We know for certain what they were teaching about the Virgin Mary in 500 is not what they were teaching in 1100, is not what they were teaching in 1841. We know what they were teaching about the resurrection in 500 is not what they were teaching in 1100 or 1500 or 1841. We know that, right? We have good records. So all of that stuff, the resurrection, the virgin birth, that's the transient in Christianity. Comes and goes with the centuries, right? And he's got the passage I love to quote, right? Men are burned in one century for professing what men are burned in the next century for denying. Right? That's Theodore Parker, 1841. So that begs the question, if that's the transient, all that doctrinal stuff, what's the permanent? What's the core of it? Why does it still even here? Since what is its staying power? And he answers the question. He says, it's not the doctrines, it's not the dogmas, it's the idea, it's the symbol, it's the narrative. It is this symbol is a good word that he uses. That here was a human merely being just like you and me, who had flesh and bones, and who bled and loved and suffered and transcended all earthly concerns. A human being who transcended all earthly concerns. And Parker says, we still have Christianity because that idea, that symbol, that narrative speaks to something that deep within us that we find deeply truthful. Does that make sense? So that's what Parker is saying in 1841. These are the theological foundations, if you will, of modern Unitarian Universalism. These are the reforms and thinking that have led to where we are today, where we are religious pluralists. And I am able to slightly joke but accurately say to my colleagues in the ministry of all different faiths, right? You can come to church here on any given Sunday morning and have a seat in the sanctuary, and you're about equally likely to find yourself sitting next to a confirmed atheist or a believing Christian or a pagan or a Buddhist or a Jew or someone who wouldn't take a label. If you wrapped it up in pretty blue ribbon and handed it to them on a silver platter with their name engraved on it. No thanks. We're all here. That's probably a good place to end. Thanks.
Would you please rise in body and or spirit, give one more stretch, and join me in singing out of the gray hymnal, number 159, This Is My Song. This is my song, O God of all the nations, a song of peace for lands afar and mine. This is my home, the country where my heart is. Here are my hopes, my dreams, my holy shrine. But other hearts in other lands are beating with hopes and dreams as true and high as mine. My country's skies are bluer than the ocean, and sunlight beams on clover leaf and pine. But other lands have sunlight too, and clover, and skies are everywhere as blue as mine. Oh, hear my song, thou God of all the nations, a song of peace for their land and for mine. Please remain standing for our closing affirmation. Behind all our differences and beneath our diversity, there is a unity that makes us one and binds us forever together throughout all time, through life and death and the space between the stars, throughout all time, through life and death and the space between the stars.
Our benediction today: in a round world, what goes around comes around. Circles and cycles of stars, seasons of growth and decay, birth and death, and unexpected resurrection. You and I and we are inextricably connected to all that is and was and ever will be. Amen. Our service is ended. Go in peace.